In the winter of 1977 to 1978, the streets of Sacramento were ripped open by a spree of violence so bizarre and horrifying it would earn the perpetrator a name the tabloids would never forget: Richard Trenton Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. Between December 29, 1977 and January 27, 1978, Chase murdered 6 people in a short, terrifying burst of killings that would expose a mind consumed by delusion, bloodlust, and ritual. Richard Chase was born in 1950 and grew up under conditions that, in later interviews and psychiatric reports, painted a life of instability, illness, and escalating obsession. Chase spent time capturing and killing animals and then eating them raw or blended up. In 1976, he was hospitalized for blood poisoning after injecting himself with the blood from a rabbit he unalived. Many patients and nurses were frightened by him and referred to him as Dracula. He was frequently found with blood smeared on his face, which he claimed was from an injury while shaving. However, he was actually biting the heads off birds and sucking their blood. Once he began taking medication, he was released. The unaliving began on December 29, 1977, when 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin in a seemingly random drive-by as he unloaded groceries from his car. That first sudden, inexplicable, would be the opening chord of a spree that only grew more brutal. On January 23, 1978, Teresa Wallen, 3 months pregnant, was in her home. Investigators found the scene drenched in violence. Chase had mutilated the body and, according to surviving evidence and witness testimony compiled during the investigation, drank the victim's blood, using a discarded yogurt container to carry the liquid away. The brutality at Wallen's home signaled that this was not a simple homicide. It bore the hallmarks of ritualized disfigurement and a perpetrator acting out a pathology centered on consumption. 4 days later, on January 27, 1978, Sacramento police discovered a scene that would finally end the terror. In the home of 36-year-old Evelyn Meirath lay her body and the bodies of 3 others who had been in the house that day: 60-year-old Jason Meirath, 22-month-old David Ferreira, and a family friend, Dan Meredith. All 4 had been unalived. The scene was described by detectives as catastrophic, a house of carnage, and forensic evidence at the scene linked Chase to the act. It was in the aftermath of the Meirath unaliving that investigators uncovered the most disturbing elements of Chase's crimes. He had drunk the blood of victims and engaged in cannibalism, consuming parts of human remains in an apparent attempt to stave off decay, and to satisfy a delusional belief that ingestion would somehow protect him. The capture came quickly after the Meirath discovery. Chase was arrested on January 27, 1978. Officers found physical evidence and blood patterns that tied him to the scenes. As the investigation unfolded, the picture that emerged was grim and simple: 6 victims, a rapid killing spree, and a perpetrator whose delusions had escalated into ritualized violence and consumption. At trial, prosecutors presented forensic evidence and witness accounts. Defense experts described severe mental illness. Still, a jury concluded Chase was legally sane at the time of the crimes and convicted him on 6 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. Before that sentence could be carried out, Richard Trenton Chase died by overdosing on his prescribed antidepressant medication in his cell at San Quentin State Prison on December 26, 1980. On June 13, 1981, in Paris, France, a small Asian man was trying to dispose of 2 heavy bags into a nearby lake when he realized that he was being watched. He slides the bags under some bushes before walking away. Intrigued, some couples approach the bags to see what's inside. Once they open the first bag, they are in for a shock. Inside is the blood-mutilated torso of a woman. The police are called and quickly take custody of the bags. Inside the second bag are the victim's head and limbs. Clearly, the small man was trying to dump this body in the lake and panicked when he saw he was being watched. The remains are taken in for an autopsy. Once on the table, her body tells the story of a grisly crime. The woman had suffered a gunshot wound to her neck, which was the cause of her death. But that wasn't all. Her body was mutilated extensively, with large pieces of her legs, breasts, and buttocks cut away. An exam would reveal that someone had violated her corpse. About 2 days. Issei Sagawa was born on April 26, 1949, in Kobe, Japan, into a wealthy family. From early childhood, he was frail and socially withdrawn, often bedridden and isolated. He later admitted that even as a child, he experienced violent sexual fantasies, not about domination, but about literally consuming another human being. His obsession centered on women with Western features, whom he viewed with both fascination and desire. After earning a degree in English literature in Japan, Sagawa moved to France to pursue graduate studies at the Sorbonne. Paris, the city of art and intellect, became the setting for his monstrous descent. He lived alone in a small apartment, spending his days studying poetry, and his nights haunted by cannibalistic fantasies he said he could no longer suppress. René Hartvelt, a 25-year-old Dutch student and classmate at the Sorbonne, was cultured, bright, and trusting. Sagawa invited her to his apartment under the pretense of recording and translating a German poem for a school assignment. As she began to read, he took out a .22 caliber rifle and shot her in the neck from behind. She died instantly. What followed was a horror beyond imagination. Sagawa later described that he fainted at first, then woke up overcome by realization. He sexually assaulted her corpse, then went out to buy a butcher knife. Over the next 2 days, he cut her body into pieces, parts of her flesh raw and cooked, photographed the process, and stored the remains in his refrigerator. He said he wanted to absorb her energy, to become one with her. When decomposition began, he stuffed what was left into 2 suitcases and took them to the Bois de Boulogne Park, intending to dump them in a lake. But passers-by noticed blood leaking from the luggage and alerted police. 4 days later, Issei Sagawa was arrested. Sagawa spent 2 years in French custody awaiting trial. Psychiatrists declared him legally insane, unfit to stand trial. The judge ordered that he be confined indefinitely to a mental institution instead of prison. In 1984, at his family's request, France deported Sagawa to Japan. Upon arrival, he was sent to Matsuzawa Hospital in Tokyo for evaluation. There, Japanese psychiatrists concluded the opposite. Sagawa was sane and sexually motivated, not psychotic. But France had sealed the case and refused to share its legal documents, making it impossible for Japan to retry him. On August 12, 1986, only 5 years after the murder, Issei Sagawa walked free. The decision sparked outrage across the world. A confessed murderer, one who described his crime in vivid detail, was suddenly a free man. Once released, Sagawa became a grotesque celebrity in Japan. He wrote books about his crime, appeared in talk shows and documentaries, posed for photographs, and even acted in adult films. He was invited to art exhibitions, interviewed by foreign journalists, and published essays on cannibalism as a philosophical act. The most notorious exploration of his psyche came in the 2017 documentary Cannibal, which examines his crime through his own reflections and the uneasy relationship with his brother. Sagawa often described himself as both remorseful and still fascinated by cannibalism. "I wanted to die eaten by someone like me," he once said. In 2013, he suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed. On November 24, 2022, Issei Sagawa died of pneumonia in Tokyo, age 73. In the quiet town of Rothenburg, Germany, in the early 2000s, a crime unfolded that would shock the world and challenge the very limits of human understanding. Armin Meiwes, a 41-year-old computer technician, became infamous not for a crime of passion or greed, but for an act that would come to be known as one of the most notorious cases of consensual homicide in modern history. Meiwes was an otherwise unremarkable man, reserved, socially isolated, and struggling with deep-seated fantasies that he had long kept private. In March of 2001, he posted an advertisement on a German internet forum, seeking a willing volunteer to participate in an act that most could scarcely imagine, to be and eaten. The advertisement was explicit, detailing his desire to find someone who would willingly submit to his deadly impulses. Bernd Jürgen Brandes, a 43-year-old engineer, responded. Brandes shared Meiwes' morbid curiosity and, driven by his own compulsions, agreed to meet. What followed was a chilling encounter that blurred the lines between consent and crime. When the two men met at Meiwes' home, the initial meeting involved a series of rituals and preparations, including video documentation of the act, a harrowing record of Brandes' voluntary submission. In a calculated and methodical manner, Meiwes killed Brandes and then began the process of consuming of his body, a practice that continued over several months. The case came to light when Meiwes, seeking others to participate in similar acts, posted another online message detailing what he had done. Alarmed by the explicit nature of the post, authorities were notified. When police arrived at Meiwes' home, they found evidence of the murder and preserved remains of Brandes, confirming a crime that defied conventional understanding. The legal proceedings that followed were equally unprecedented. Initially convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, Meiwes' case went through an appeal that ultimately resulted in a conviction for securing him a life sentence. The court grappled with questions that had never before been addressed. Could a person legally consent to their own death? Could such a crime be considered anything less than murder under German law? Psychologists and criminologists who studied Meiwes described him as a man driven by an obsessive need for control and intimacy in the most extreme sense. His meticulous documentation, the voluntary nature of his victim, and the calculated planning painted a portrait of a man whose desires transgressed every boundary of societal norms. Pazuzu Algarad was born John Alexander Lawson in 1981 in North Carolina, a child whose early life was far from ordinary. From a young age, he displayed a fascination with darkness and the macabre, drawn to tales of death, violence, and the occult. Algarad legally changed his name in 2002 to conform with his satanic beliefs. His name was chosen after Pazuzu, an ancient demonic deity who was well known to the Babylonians and Assyrians throughout the first millennium BCE, and his surname Algarad, meaning the Lord of the Locusts in Arabic. A self-proclaimed Satanist with a fascination for the occult, was not just a criminal, he was a figure whose actions would shock even those familiar with the darker corners of the human psyche. Algarad's life was marked by chaos from the beginning. Known in his community for his erratic behavior and intense obsession with Satanism, he cultivated a persona steeped in fear and intimidation. But beneath this theatrical exterior was a man capable of unspeakable violence. The true horror of Algarad's crimes came to light after the discovery of human remains buried in the backyard of his home. Investigators soon uncovered the remains of multiple victims, revealing that Algarad had lured young men into his world of darkness and ritualistic obsession. His acts of violence were extreme, but what shocked the world most was his cannibalism. Evidence suggested that he had consumed parts of his victims, a fact that painted a chilling portrait of a man whose depravity knew no bounds. Algarad's fascination with Satanism and death was not merely a private obsession, it was performative, a way to assert control and terrorize those around him. Neighbors described a man who exuded menace, someone who reveled in the fear he provoked. Authorities found ritualistic symbols, occult paraphernalia, and detailed evidence of his horrific crimes, confirming that these were not acts of impulse, but deliberate, calculated atrocities. His arrest in 2014 sent shockwaves through the community. Algarad was charged with multiple counts of murder, abuse of corpses, and other violent crimes. But even behind bars, the story of Pazuzu Algarad remains haunting. The combination of ritualistic belief, extreme violence, and cannibalism ensured that his name would forever be synonymous with evil in the annals of true crime. Algarad died in 2015, leaving behind a legacy of terror that authorities and psychologists would continue to study.
All right, let's do it. Okay. Well, this one will fail real quick.
Just a little part.
Oh yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely unfit for human habitat. No drainage. Touches?
Kind of low for you.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's get those, we'll get those rooms back there.
Like over here.
Look at that
Step.
Jesus Christ.
Sir, did you by chance? Yes, did. Right here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Is that thing dead?
No, it's alive. I think there's mold coming through the roof. Watch your step, there's a lot of broken glass.
Okay.
Actually, you haven't hit the worst part yet.
Don't move any of my hoarding cases will match with this one.
And this is the cleanest room in the house.
Huh?
This is the cleanest room in the house. Get that room down there.
That one, yeah, I got it good.
All of that.
Boy, this guy had a bad case of whatever they got.
Fourth step from the bottom is kind of loose, so
Okay.
be careful on it. That one. Pretty good.
Dog crap, huh? Okay, I actually need to do it outside. And some air.
Thought you'll get a whole lot better right here. Watch the step here. This is actually where one was buried.
In the summer of 1966, the city of Chicago was already fighting its own battles, rising crime, civil unrest, and a growing sense of unease sweeping across its streets. But nothing would prepare the city for the horror that unfolded on a single night in July, a night that would etch one man's name into the darkest chapters of American criminal history, Richard Benjamin Speck. Born in Illinois in 1941, Speck was raised in a childhood defined by instability, a loving father taken by a sudden heart attack, a mother who remarried a violent alcoholic. By the age of 12, Speck had already spiraled into truancy, petty crime, and a festering anger that grew with every passing year. By 1966, Speck was a drifter with a record, assaults, burglaries, bar fights, yet nothing hinted at the scale of brutality he was capable of, until the night of July 13th. Inside a quiet townhouse on Chicago's South Side, 8 young student nurses from the South Chicago Community Hospital were preparing for bed. They were daughters, sisters, aspiring caregivers, women devoted to service and compassion. But shortly before midnight, their home was invaded by a stranger armed with a knife and an unfathomable hatred burning inside him. What followed was one of the most sadistic mass murders in American history. Moving room to room with cold precision, Richard Speck bound, strangled, and stabbed the women, leading them away one by one. He assaulted several of them before unaliving them. Over the course of hours, he unleashed a level of violence so ferocious that investigators later struggled to comprehend how one man could carry it out alone. 8 innocent women lost their lives that night, but amidst the carnage, something Speck never anticipated happened. One woman survived. 23-year-old Corazon Amorao hid beneath a bunk bed, frozen in terror, as she listened to her friends being unalive just feet away. When police arrived, she emerged as the sole witness who would later identify Richard Speck as the killer. The city erupted in shock. The media called him a beast, a monster, evil beyond understanding. The nation demanded answers. How could one man commit such horror? During his trial, Speck sat cold and expressionless. No remorse, no apology. When asked why he killed the nurses, Speck famously muttered, It just wasn't their night. Convicted on 8 counts of murder, he was sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. But the story didn't end there. Years later, leaked prison tapes exposed Richard Speck living a secret life behind bars, using drugs, wearing women's clothing, and bragging openly about the murders. He smiled and said, "If they only knew how much fun I was having, they'd turn me loose." On December 5th, 1991, Richard Speck died of a heart attack in prison at age 49. No one claimed his body. Jack Spilman was born on August 30th, 1969, in Spokane, Washington, a childhood overshadowed by instability, abandonment, and a growing darkness that no one around him recognized in time. Even as a young boy, Spilman showed disturbing behavior: cruelty toward animals, fascination with mutilation, and a chilling lack of empathy. Teachers described him as withdrawn, volatile, and unpredictable. What no one knew then was that Spilman had already begun fantasizing about murder, fantasies that involved domination, pain, and transformation. He later claimed he felt a deep connection to wolves, that he believed he was born to hunt. This belief would shape the savagery of his crimes. In 1987, at just 18, Spilman committed his first known murder, the killing of 9-year-old Mandy Stavik, a child he abducted and murdered before discarding her body in a creek. But with limited evidence, the case went unsolved for years. Spilman walked free. He drifted across Washington state, accumulating arrests for burglary, theft, and assault. But it wasn't until April 1995 that the true extent of his brutality would be revealed. On the evening of April 16, 1995, police in the small city of Spokane Valley responded to a call that would forever change their understanding of the predator stalking their community. Inside the home of Rita Anderson, officers discovered a scene that defied belief. Rita, a 48-year-old mother, lay brutally murdered, stabbed repeatedly, her body mutilated with precision and fury. But the horror didn't end there. Nearby were the bodies of Rita's 2 daughters, aged 8 and 15. All 3 had been attacked with overwhelming force. Detectives immediately suspected the killer had spent significant time inside the home. The attack was not chaotic. It was methodical and personal. A break came when investigators examined a burglary report from the Anderson home just weeks before the murders. A witness had seen a tall, muscular man in the area, one who matched the description of a known career criminal, Jack Owen Spillman. Spilman was arrested shortly after, and in his possession were stolen items belonging to the victims, including jewelry belonging to the girls, kept as trophies. Blood evidence, tire tracks, and fibers linked him definitively to the scene. Facing overwhelming evidence, Spilman remained calm, emotionless. He spoke with no remorse. In interviews, he admitted he had considered killing many times before, and investigators believe he planned to continue. The brutality earned him the notorious nickname the Werewolf Butcher, referencing his obsession with wolves, his methodical dismemberment, and the animalistic savagery of his crimes. In 1996, Spilman was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Years later, advances in DNA technology linked him to the earlier murder of 9-year-old Mandy Stavik, finally solving the case that had haunted investigators for nearly a decade. Jack Owen Spillman III remains incarcerated today. In the heart of Milwaukee, tucked inside a nondescript apartment building on North 25th Street, detectives would open a door that revealed horrors beyond imagination. Behind that door lived a man polite in conversation, quiet in demeanor, yet capable of crimes so depraved, so systematic, that the world still speaks his name with unease. This is the story of Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, into a troubled household fractured by conflict and psychological instability. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, methodical and often absent, while his mother, Joyce, battled depression and pill addiction, leaving young Jeffrey adrift between emotional chaos and neglect. By the time he was 4, Dahmer displayed a fascination that adults misread as eccentricity. He collected roadkill, dissected carcasses, and hoarded bones with a calm, scientific curiosity masking something far darker. Through adolescence, he grew increasingly isolated, withdrawn, drinking heavily, unable to connect with peers. By his own admission, his fantasies had already taken shape before he reached adulthood. Fantasies of control, immobilization, possession, fantasies he would soon act upon. His first murder came in June 1978, just weeks after graduating high school. Dahmer picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks and invited him home for drinks. When Hicks attempted to leave, something inside Dahmer snapped. He struck him from behind with a dumbbell, strangled him, and dismembered the body in the basement. He buried the remains in shallow earth, then months later, dug them up again to crush the bones. It was the moment Dahmer later described as the point where my compulsions became too strong. For nearly a decade, Dahmer drifted in and out of control. He joined the U.S. Army only to be discharged for alcohol abuse, lived with his grandmother, where his behavior escalated into arrests for indecent exposure and molestation. Yet over and over, authorities dismissed him as troubled rather than dangerous. His inner world grew darker, his fantasies sharper, and by 1987, the monster inside him fully awakened. The spree began with Stephen Tuomi in a hotel room, where Dahmer claimed he awoke beside a corpse with no memory of the act, but it was enough to ignite the compulsions that had stalked him since childhood. From that point on, Dahmer followed a chillingly consistent pattern. He sought out young men, often marginalized, often vulnerable, luring them with promises of money, alcohol, or modeling photographs. Once inside his apartment, he drugged them, strangled them, and carried out the rituals that defined his pathology. Between 1987 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys. Inside apartment 213, Dahmer constructed a world of complete domination. He posed his victims' bodies for Polaroid photographs. He dismembered them in a ritualistic manner. He preserved skulls, organs, and skeletons as trophies of permanence. He performed acts of necrophilia, and in some cases, chillingly, calmly, he consumed parts of their bodies, telling investigators it made him feel they became a part of him forever. His refrigerator held flesh, his freezer contained severed heads, his bedroom closet stored skulls carefully bleached and arranged. He even kept a large blue barrel filled with acid where torsos dissolved over days. One of the greatest failures came in May 1991, when 14-year-old Conorak Synthasamphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, disoriented, drugged, bleeding. Neighbors called the police. Officers arrived to find a terrified child, but Dahmer, calm, polite, coherent, convinced them it was a domestic dispute with his adult lover. The boy was returned into Dahmer's custody. Within an hour, he was dead. It remains one of the most haunting law enforcement misjudgments in American history. Dahmer's reign ended on July 22, 1991, when Tracy Edwards, another intended victim, escaped the apartment in handcuffs and led police back to the scene. Inside, detectives uncovered a nightmare, and the photographs, the skulls, the freezer, the blue barrel, and the head in the refrigerator that confirmed every suspicion. One officer, stepping back in disbelief, muttered the words that became legend. "This is real." In the weeks that followed, Dahmer confessed with a disturbing calmness, detailing necrophilia, dismemberment, cannibalism, organ preservation, and his attempt to create a private altar of skulls. He showed no anger, no panic, only an eerie acceptance of who he was and what he had done. In 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of 15 murders and sentenced to 957 years in prison, but he would not serve them. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, ending the life of one of America's most infamous serial killers at the age of 34. On the quiet, forested edges of northern British Columbia lies one of the most haunting stretches of road in Canada. Highway 16, chillingly known as the Highway of Tears, a place where countless women, many of them indigenous, disappeared without a trace. For decades, the region lived under a shadow of fear. But in 2010, that shadow would finally take human form in a young man no one suspected a teenager who looked more like a boy next door than a predator. His name was Cody Allen Legebokoff. Born in Fort St. James in 1990, Cody grew up in a small, tight-knit community. Teachers described him as quiet. Friends called him friendly, even shy. There were no childhood traumas, no history of violence, no warning signs of the storm that was coming. By 17, he was already spiraling, drifting between jobs, abusing cocaine, and seeking attention online in dark chat rooms where he boasted about violence he had not yet committed. But soon, the boasting would turn real. Between 2009 and 2010, Cody Legebokoff embarked on a killing spree that left 4 women dead, each murder more brutal than the last. All of them were vulnerable. Some struggled with addiction, some battled homelessness. One was a child, and each one crossed paths with a young man who seemed harmless, until it was too late. But what brought an end to the murders wasn't a manhunt. It was simple patrol duty. On November 27, 2010, an RCMP officer noticed a young man driving erratically down a snowy road outside Prince George. His truck was spattered with blood. Cody claimed he had been hunting, but the officer sensed something was wrong. Minutes later, just off a logging road, police discovered the mutilated body of 15-year-old Lauren Leslie. She was blind in one eye, vulnerable, and had trusted Cody. In court, the pathologist described the crime scene as overkill. The arrest of an 18-year-old local boy shocked the entire region. Parents knew him. Teachers remembered him. No one imagined the smiling teenager at the hockey rink could be a serial killer. During his interrogation, Cody sat cold, flat, emotionless, insisting that women had attacked him, that he acted only in self-defense. His lies collapsed quickly. DNA, blood evidence, and violent digital messages tied him to all 4 murders. Even after conviction, he never expressed remorse. In 2014, Cody Legebokoff became the youngest serial killer in Canadian history ever sentenced to life with no parole for 25 years.